Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Help Is Here podcast, brought to you by the Beyond Compulsion Academy. Today we're talking about the self-improvement relapse cycle. On Sunday, I went for a coffee with a friend called Sophie, and I hadn't seen her for about 6 to 12 months. It'd been quite a little while. So yeah, we're having a good catch-up and we're talking about books because I run this book club and she still hadn't been. And I was saying, yeah, you're going to come to the next one then. 'Cause she kept saying, like, I'll come to this book club, and then she just never turned up. So anyway, she's like, yeah, like, what are the people like at the book club? What sort of books are you reading? Blah, blah, blah. We're having a chat, and then I'm talking about, yeah, I really love fiction, you know. I will read sort of like one fiction book a month. And she's like, oh, yeah, what about like non-fiction? And I'm like, nah, I honestly don't read non-fiction anymore. I was like, I'm so done with self-improvement. And she's like, what? Like, she's so surprised. Later on in the day, I go out to Edale in the countryside, and I'm out for a walk with my mum and my sister. My sister's talking about Atomic Habits. She just started reading Atomic Habits, right? Which I was a little bit surprised by, because my sister's been a lot less involved in self-improvement sort of content than myself. And I was like, oh yeah, I've read that like 3 times. Like, I used to go to the library and like basically study that book. And I was like, it's terrible. And then she's like, what? Like, what are you on about? And I was like, yeah, you don't want to read that. You don't want to read that. And she's like, wait, what are you on about? Like, you love that book, don't you? And I was like, I did. I definitely did, you know, in the past. I used to love a lot of self-improvement books. But the thing is, now that I've overcome my addiction, I've realised that I was actually stuck in this cycle of consuming self-improvement with the real goal to overcome my addiction. I realise now that was the number one biggest problem in my life by a long way. And yet, all that self-improvement content I was consuming, it didn't actually help me. It didn't help me deal with compulsive desire correctly. It didn't help me deal with those urges. That's the main thing. It didn't help me rewire those neural pathways, which got addicted from the age of 12. And so I was looking for a solution in a place where answers could not be found. So I explained to her about the habit loop. James Clear talks about the habit loop, where you have the cue, the craving, the response and the reward. And I was saying how there's a part of that book which I think is very good, you know, talking about getting your clothes out for the gym before you go to the gym, or maybe putting a book in a certain place so you know you're going to like read in the evening. Like, let's say you want to start reading every night, maybe like putting a book by your bed. It's not a bad idea. Maybe have a lamp there, and then okay, you're more likely to read, or putting a journal on your desk, that sort of thing. And I did apply a lot of those concepts to my life, and it was very, very good actually for maybe building good habits. But when it comes to removing bad habits, a lot of self-improvement content really misses the mark, in my opinion. And it's actually based in what I would call helplessness. So, you know, in that book, Atomic Habits, he talks about removing the triggers. And also, by the way, just going back to like Sophie as well, you know, it was just a weird day because like I'd had 2 conversations, like one with Sophie, one with my sister, and both people had been like completely shocked that I'd taken this massive U-turn on self-improvement and non-fiction books. So anyway, that's why I brought that up, and it just really came to my mind, and I was like, oh, I'd love to talk about that on the podcast. So anyway, Atomic Habits, yeah, we've got the cue, craving, response, reward. And James Clear talks a little bit about removing the cue that creates the craving. Now, when it comes to addiction recovery, this information is really, really detrimental. And a lot of people are applying it to try and deal with their addiction, but it doesn't work. So in the context of porn addiction, we've got blockers, we've got, you know, a lot of content talking about removing the triggers. I spoke to people this week who have bought subscriptions for things like Covenant Eyes, where you literally block yourself from watching porn. And the thing is, the problem's going on in the brain. Compulsive desire refuses to be ignored. Those neural pathways are already in place. They do not change until you connect to them and choose to change them yourself. But that doesn't happen if you remove the opportunity to get connected to the compulsive desire. So doing all this external stuff, like removing the triggers, it's not going to work, because you're going to have the craving. Like, the craving's in the brain. It's not going on externally. That's what I'm getting at here. It's these neural pathways that have changed. We talk about this psychological emotional dependency on a mind, mood, altering experience. Like, you know, you get brought into this world, and you hit an age where you get exposed to porn in one way or another, and you're not told how detrimental this is to your mental health. So I was 12, started watching porn, and honestly, it took me until the age of 16 to even realise that there was any consequences to consuming porn. I had literally no idea. It took me getting erectile dysfunction with the girl that I was like in love with to realize, shit, I've got a problem here, you know? So 4 years of basically wiring my brain to get addicted to porn at the age of 12 to 16. No idea of the consequences, literally none. No one had told me. And many people are in the same position. They develop these new neural pathways which get addicted at a very, very young age. And then they try and stop the behaviour by removing the triggers. But it doesn't work because the problem's in the brain. And so what we need to do is realise that unless we actually connect to the compulsive desire and get into that neural pathway of desire, this problem is never going to change. We're going to continue having it, and the cravings will come up in all these different ways. So we talk a lot about, removing the triggers externally, and that's what I would call like a physical trigger. But then there's also the emotional triggers. So I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I made a bit of an error in my judgment when it came to getting the train over to Bradford to go to the theatre. I'd actually thought that my train was at 4:57, but it was actually meant to get into Bradford at 4:57. So I ended up getting the train like an hour later, and I was a little bit late for the meal. I was running up to the meal. It was at this restaurant called Mumtaz. This was before the theatre. I'm running up to the theatre, and I got catcalled for the first time as well. So that was kind of crazy. This woman was shouting at me. I was like, what is going on here? She was like in her 50s. And it was weird as well because she was with her son who was like 15. But anyway, that was a bit of a tangent. So anyway, I'm late for this meal. I got catcalled on the way. So I don't know how to feel about that. I don't know if that's like emasculating or whether my ego actually quite likes it. But anyway, so we get to the meal. But the point of all of that, because I'm getting on such a tangent here, the point of that was in the past, when I used to be like an hour late for something, my head would fall off entirely. And I'd be like, oh, I'm such an idiot. I'm such a failure. Why did I miss the train? I'm so stupid. Oh my God. And I'd have the addicted part of my mind just hitting me with all this self-deprecation. And then eventually I'd end up wanting to look at porn because that's how my brain had created these new neural pathways where it was basically like, you make a mistake in life, like you fuck up. Okay, now you want to look at porn to escape that discomfort. But that was just a neural pathway that I had back then. Whereas this time, I get to the meal, I'm with my family, I sit down, I'm like, oh my God, what a journey I just had. This was crazy. And also, by the way, I'm a bit silly for making a mistake just now. Or I did a silly thing. Because there's a big differentiation between doing something silly, like making a mistake, doing something stupid, and you being stupid. There's a massive differentiation between those two things. So I was just like cool with it. I was like, oh yeah, sorry guys, my bad. And yeah, got catcalled. But anyway, so yeah, back to the whole thing. What were we talking about? So yeah, we were talking about triggers before we went on the tangent, and self-improvement books, all of this stuff. Basically, I don't need to ramble on too much more. The point is, if you're removing your triggers, you're trying to deny the reality of your addiction. Your brain's wired, and you're going to have emotional triggers, you're going to have physical triggers. There would have been times for me in the past where if I missed the train, I would have been emotionally triggered because I would have had all these feelings of failure and whatnot. But actually, that is just the addicted part of the mind creating a craving and using the emotions as the justification, the explanation, the rationalization, the reason to choose to engage in the compulsive behaviour. But when we really break it down and we understand addiction correctly, you realise that you don't even need a reason because the consequences remain the same. And the more you look for these reasons, the more you go around in circles, the more you consume the self-improvement content and make these improvements in your life, the more you go around in circles. Because there will always come a time where you have this urge and you're like, fuck, what do I do now? What do I do now? And unless you are trained and you know exactly how to deal with your junky thoughts, your unanswerable questions, the addicted part of the mind spinning you in circles, making you feel helpless, deprived, making you feel terrible and like this feeling's going to last forever. Unless you know how to deal with that in that moment when you have that compulsive desire, you're probably going to stay in the addiction. And that's why it's so important to realise that there's literally nothing wrong with you for having this problem and the methods of failing you. You are not the failure here. I really, really hope that you can understand that everything you've tried up until now hasn't worked for a reason because it's not tapping into the neural pathway of compulsive desire. It's trying to get you away from it. It's trying to remove the triggers like James Clear's atomic habits, We don't want to do that because there is a possibility to feel empowered, to feel like you completely trust yourself, and to feel like you can deal with literally any craving that comes up because you understand the addicted part of the mind and you know exactly how to deal with it in that moment. And you build up so much self-trust, confidence, this groundedness, this stability from dealing with those urges in the correct way, time and time and time again, until the point that your neural pathways do change and you no longer even have the desire. I hope you know this is possible for you. If you would like to learn more, I send out emails very regularly. You can get on the email list by using the link in the description. Thank you so much for being here, listening, and we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.